Concept 3, which is entitled We Trust AA Enough, this is an AA group, to delegate our group's authority to someone other than the group. This is how leadership decision-making works in AA. It's a really clear essay, the Concept 3 essay. I'm going to take you through most of the paragraphs, not all of them today. I don't want the video to be too long. Let's have a read of how the concept itself reads. I feel it's rather convoluted. And also this concept reads, I feel, in a way that expresses the difference between AA World Services in America, which is a very big organisation, versus AA Australia and our service structure, which has a lot less infrastructure because of our member size, etc. As a traditional means of creating and maintaining a clearly defined working relation between the group, the conference, the AA General Service Board and its several service corporation staffs, committees and executives, and of thus ensuring their effective leadership, it is here suggested that we endow each of these elements of world service with a traditional right of decision. Not the easiest thing to get your head around. And one of the reasons is in AA Australia, our staffs, committees and executives, service corporations are very different than AA World Services. I mean, there's the Grapevine, for example, which is a service corporation incorporated separate to AA World Services. The General Service Office in New York has a lot of staff. They have departments and staff working within departments and all that kind of thing. They have more committees and executives than we potentially do here in AA Australia. So we need to do a little bit of tailoring. We need to think about AA Australia, not AA World Services. So, for example, we endow, the last line here, each of these elements of, in our case, Australian service with a traditional right of decision. Okay, not the easiest thing to read. I find Bill Wilson's essay, however, is a really, really clear one. Let's start with the heading here. Groups express their ultimate authority via delegating it to those they choose to trust. So I've got a group, an AA group, your home group. They have a view on something. They want to share that view with AA Australia to be an influential part of the decision-making in AA Australia. There's 6 people in the home group. They can't all turn up somewhere because if every group had 6 people in it and they all turned up, you'd have 18,000 people in a room trying to make a decision. Impossible. So we delegate. And this is the great, almost spiritual irony that we need to get our head around in regards to Tradition 2, which I'm about to read about. Tradition 2 says, yes, groups sit at the top, but in order to enact that power, ironically, they have to delegate it to someone who is not their group, an individual member of their group, a general service rep, or in fact, an area delegate, someone like that, someone who is removed from their group conscience, but can carry or at least think about the message of that group conscience. So there's an act of giving. There's an act of trusting that actually makes that decision-making power spiritual. Here's what Bill Wilson writes. We have seen how the AA groups, under the concept of the group conscience, are today holding the ultimate authority and the final responsibility for world services. But they don't all turn up and sit in the same room to make a decision. We have also noted how, by reason of the conference charter and the trusted servant provision of Tradition 2, so 2 reference points we can research further, the groups have delegated to their General Service Conference full authority to manage and conduct AA's world affairs, or in our case, AA Australia's affairs. So this means we need to get our heads around, if we are a member of an AA group, we don't always get our way. It's not our delegates' job to necessarily carry our message and stick to it when they go to conference, because there might be 60 groups in that delegate's area who all have slightly different opinions on something. It's the delegate's job to be trusted to think seriously about what they're hearing from the groups and ask their higher power, ask the group conscience they become a part of at conference to help in their decision-making. Trust, trust, trust. And the idea of authority and trust becoming an amalgam, that's the spiritual bit. That's the exciting bit. Bill continues, for more information, check out the AA Conference Charter, the Australian one. It reads different than the American one. Not much, but there you go. The conference and the General Service Board charters, so we have 2 charters in AA Australia, both available in our service manual, in broad terms, as charters go, define the responsibility of the conference to act on behalf of AA as a whole. Okay, so their responsibility, conference's responsibility is to seriously consider the best interests of AA as a whole, all of the groups. In these two documents, a necessarily large area of delegated service authority and responsibility has been staked out in general terms. These instruments, in a general way, describe the relation between the groups, the conference, the trustees, and the active service units, whatever those service units are. These broad definitions and descriptions are an indispensable frame of reference, and we could not function without them. So if you're a GSR, my strong suggestion is read the charters. They are super important. They are argument settlers, and they are opportunity starters. We need to understand how AA is structured and how it works. And they're very simple documents. I'm going to show you a few excerpts from the Australian Service Charter to make that point. In fact, I'm going to do it now, just to see these broad, staked out descriptions of power and authority, how it works in AA. Conference relation to AA. So this is what our Australian Conference Charter says. Third point. The conference will act for AA in the perpetuation and guidance of its world services. And it will also be the vehicle by which the AA movement, us, the fellowship, can express its views upon all matters of vital AA policy and all hazardous deviations from AA tradition. Nice description of why we have conference. Conference members should be free to vote as their conscience dictates. So now we're looking at concept 3, the right of decision. If I'm a member of conference, it says here in the charter, I am free to vote as I feel I need to. But the word conscience is there, which means morals come into it. They should also be free to decide what questions should be taken to the group level, whether for information, discussion, or their own direct instruction. So that, in other words, it's not really up to the groups to tell the delegate how they want the delegate to work for them. Our charter says it's the opposite. It's the area delegate that needs to decide how the groups should be interacted with in terms of influencing their decision making. There's a great argument starter right there. But no change in Article 12 of the Charter or in the 12 traditions of AA or in the 12 steps of AA may be made with less than the written consent of 3/4 of the AA groups worldwide, as described in the resolution adopted by the 1955 Conference and the Convention of North America. So in other words, there are a few areas where every single group must have an individual say, but they are the exceptions to the rule. So we want to change the 12 traditions, the way they're written, all of, if you like, Concept 12 in the Charter, or the 12 steps, the wording, we need to basically forget we have a conference structure, delegated authorities to make decisions for us. It goes back to the group level. Now, I'd love to know what the process for voting would be to get 75% of every single member or every AA group to have a vote. It's hard enough to know which groups are open or not after COVID, let alone what they're doing. But anyway, I'm sure they've got a process buried away in a filing cabinet somewhere in New York. But the point is, by and large, except for those exceptions, it's up to delegates to work out how they work with groups, consult with groups, to help make their decisions. I think it's really important to know. By the way, I am married to a conference delegate currently, and she works very hard at making sure that groups have every opportunity to influence her thinking, and she takes what they say very, very seriously because of that responsibility. Yeah. Okay, let's go on. Nevertheless, it has long been evident that these highly important charter provisions cannot by themselves ensure smooth functioning and proper leadership at the several different levels of service which are involved. This has become crystal clear, and we need not seek very far for the reasons. So, charters are not like step-by-step guides to how to do things at the group level or the district or the area level. It's why we have a service manual, not just a 3.5-page charter. And that service manual, is 200 pages long. So it's not the purpose of a charter to be specific any more than it's the Declaration of Independence's job in America to actually be legislation. Anyway, let's continue. If groups do less than trust those who represent them via delegation, how spiritually fit are they being? So we're going to go into some examples of why the Charter is just a general directive rather than a situationally specific guide. So let's go into Bill's example. For example, knowing that theirs is the final authority, and you may have been involved with groups like this, I know I have experienced them, the groups are sometimes tempted to instruct their delegates exactly how to vote upon certain matters in the conference. Because they hold the ultimate authority, there is no doubt that the AA groups might have the right to do this. If they insist, they can give directives to their delegates on any and all AA matters. Now, here, just be careful. That doesn't mean to say the delegate has to do anything with those directives, but it is the group's opportunity to give their delegate directives. But the next word is but. So let's continue. But good management, now we're looking at leadership management principles, ethics. But good management seldom means the full exercise of a stated set of ultimate rights. For example, were the groups to carry their instruction of delegates to extremes, then we would be proceeding on the false theory that group opinion is in most world service matters would somehow be much superior to conference opinion. Practically speaking, this could almost never be the case. There would be very few questions indeed that instructed delegates could better settle than a conference acting on the spot with full facts and debate to guide it. Of course, it is understood that complete reporting of conference actions is always desirable. So is full consultation with committee members and group representatives. Nevertheless, the instructed delegate who cannot act on his or her own conscience, in italics, is in a final conference vote is not a trusted servant at all. He is just a messenger. The other phrase I've heard is order taker. So there is a really strong case that you've got some of the oldest, most sober, studied up members of AA Australia sitting there representing areas on the board, GSO, and if they're, as long as their spirit and their heart is connected to God, there's every chance they're going to come up with a great decision, and the groups don't have to worry so much about making sure that they get what they want. Conference topics is a good example of that. So if we look at conference topics, and again, we're going to look, what I want to look at is this back and forth between, because the back end of that paragraph's really important, right? Yeah, delegates are trusted, but you'll notice that their responsibility is full consultation, making sure that, whatever conference decides leading up to conference, like for example, topics might get rejected and not discussed at conference. Well, obviously, conference needs to tell the fellowship why certain topics don't get up. It's a good example of, we need to report back to the general population of AA Australia. Complete reporting, it says. Transparency is the word we use in the modern world. So this is back and forth. We trust you, and in return, you share with us everything that you do. I'll give you one more example. My wife, we have a show of hands at our area before conference. People, groups come along, the GSRs show of hands, so it might be 8 out of 12 GSRs believe this about conference topic 12. Great, well, that's 75%. Is it? No, sorry, it's 66%. 2/3, great. And there were a couple of times where my wife made a decision away from that majority feeling from the groups in our area, and there was a reason for that, and she articulated that fully and transparently in her conference report, which is her enacting this paragraph and being fully responsible for being a trusted delegate. Anyway, conference topics. Groups and others submit conference topics. So at times they come from the trustees. They can come from anywhere in the fellowship. Often they come from groups and individual members. And if you read the service manual, it is suggested that these are vetted and edited at district and area by more than one group. So in fact, the GSR may go to an area assembly prior to the topic's time being finished, and they raise their topic, and all the other GSRs will have a say. And that may influence the way that topic is written. It's quite common that topics are badly written and therefore they don't get up because people don't quite understand what they're saying. All that kind of stuff. So there's an example of the GSRs being peers and bouncing ideas off each other, being each other's trusted servants. Let's say that topic gets finalised and someone presses save and then presses send. Conference committees, prior to November when we have our conference in AA Australia, will get together and either accept or reject topics, reporting why. That's a process. I'm not sure how it works exactly. I could, go to the next room and ask my wife, but I don't need to. There's that transparency. Okay, here are the conference topics. So they get published and they go back to the groups, and groups have a couple of months usually to review and discuss those topics at the group level. And the idea is that a GSR can facilitate that, or the group secretary can facilitate that discussion. And the GSR can go to workshops that might be put on by the area or the district, so they can get understanding of what each topic means, and they might refer their group in the group conscience they have at the group level to various traditions and concepts and bits of AA literature, so that it's a really schooling exercise, a learning exercise. And through vigorous discussion at the group level, the GSR walks away with a very clear view of what their group wants. And then they report their viewpoint, maybe in a workshop or an area assembly, whatever the vehicle is. We have the show of hands, like I described, to the area delegate. So the area delegate is like a sponge. They just soak up all of the viewpoints and discussion from the GSRs. And I'll go back to my wife. She's fascinated in that. It's a very important part of her preparation for conference. Then the delegate absorbs all the viewpoints, as I say, and takes this into serious consideration during conference, with the caveat they don't have to be the order taker. They don't have to be the messenger. They need to think for themselves, because once all those delegates are sitting in a room together, they influence each other. And you've got, 24 delegates plus the other members who vote in conference sharing what they've done in terms of preparing for conference and collecting all these viewpoints from all the groups in AA Australia. But then it gets put into this huge spiritual melting pot. And hopefully God turns up and the group conscience in that room somehow manifests the best possible advisory action, or rejecting the topic, or whatever it's going to be. And that's how our process works. It's deeply spiritual as long as we're trusting enough. Bill Wilson continues, the ongoing spiritual balancing act. Therefore, some traditional and practical principle has to be devised which at all levels will continuously balance the right relation between ultimate authority groups and delegated responsibility. Delegates. How then are we going to accomplish this? And then he goes on, there are three possible attitudes that we might take towards such a state of affairs. So here are the three cases. And I love this because it's a bit like when you read about the different types of alcoholic in the early parts of the big book. Let's see if our service experience and our committee experience, if you've had that in AA, which of the three states of affairs, possible attitudes, you've experienced in the past. We could, for instance, throw away all corporate charters, bylaws, job definitions and descriptions and the like. This would leave it entirely to each group of trusted servants to figure out what its authority and responsibility really is. In other words, let's throw away the service structure completely, and this, whatever you're doing over there might be different than us. But such an absence of any chartered structure would be absurd. Nothing but anarchy could result. So and by the way, I sometimes think there's an expression of this in AA Australia when areas stop having area committees. They stop electing a delegate. That's one way to go their own way, is to not participate at all. And what does Bill suggest that might be a problem? How does it be a problem? Well, anarchy, or maybe the opposite of anarchy is nothing. So we've got to look at that, like the idea of, well, I'm in AA, I'm going to do it the AA way, and I will participate. Second possible attitude, then of course we would take the opposite tack, refusing to give our leadership any worthwhile discretion at all. We could add to our present charters great numbers of rules and regulations and bylaws that would attempt to cover every conceivable action or contingency. In other words, over-regulation. That would be altogether too much red tape, more than we AAs could stand. So let's just quickly review the first one. It's groups doing their own thing and not being attached to structure at all. The other thing is to add so much detail and rules and regulations to structure that the groups basically are this controlling mechanism, and they can pull people up. Look, I'll be honest, I've heard people try and use the traditions in this second possible attitudinal way, and that's of course not their use at all. So what's Bill's recommendation? And like so many of Bill's recommendations, surprise, surprise, it's smack bang in the middle of these two extremes. Trust is a lot more spiritual. Our heading says we believe in their right to decide for us, or to consult as situation rather than AA groups dictate. So the right AA solution for this problem, Bill writes, is to be found, however, in the latter part of tradition 2, which provides for trusted servants. The more we trust someone other than our group collective, the more spiritual we are. This really means that we ought to trust our responsible leaders to decide within the understood framework of their duties, charter, AA service manual, how they will interpret and apply their own authority and responsibility to each particular problem or situation as it arises. This sort of leadership discretion, what a great concept, what a great term, should be the essence of the right of decision. And I am certain that we need not have the slightest fear of granting this indispensable privilege at nearly every level of world service. And this is such an important thing to get our head around. If you're one of those groups, for example, who wants everything that is possibly discussed at an area assembly or a district meeting, oh no, we've got to take that back to my group. I've got to take that back to my group, says the GSR. I can't decide that for myself. My group need to talk about that and tell me what to vote. No, that just slows the entire process of carrying the message down. If you're a GSR, it's your job to make that decision for yourself. You have the right of decision so that we can vote here and now. We're trying to be spiritual. AA beats us anyway. So says tradition 1, AA unity, carrying the message, primary purpose. So feel free to vote, or at least feel free to talk about with your group about allowing you to vote, because they should trust you. It's all about trust. This is the ultimate confusion and argument ender, I find. This is the back end of Bill's essay now. And he provides 3 sort of levels of trusted servantness. Point A, accepting its charter provisions to the contrary, the conference always should be able to decide which matters it will fully dispose of on its own responsibility and which questions it will refer to the AA groups. So it goes beyond delegates having this responsibility, it's the entire conference, or more usually to their committee members or GSRs for opinion or for definite guidance. Now, this is an important thing. Delegates need guidance from GSRs because the GSRs sit higher up on the conference structure. And I find the only thing that gets in the way of this beautiful working methodology is GSRs who don't know the traditions and concepts particularly well, haven't read the manual. GSRs who are fully informed, have read AA Comes of Age and all the other stuff they are required to read, can actually provide delegates with amazing support. And you see this upside down pyramid having great value in that circumstance, I've found. Therefore, Bill continues, it ought to be clearly understood and agreed that our conference delegates are primarily the world servants, the Australian servants of AA as a whole, that only in a secondary sense do they represent their respective areas. This is a killer thing. So delegates, representative of areas, only do so in a secondary sense. What's their primary role as a conference delegate? It is this. Consequently, they should on final decisions be entitled to cast their votes in the General Service Conference leading up to and during, according to the best dictates of their own judgment and conscience at that time. Trusted servants. We trust them because we know that they are thinking about us as GSRs, as group members. They are considering AA as a whole. We trust them, but they need to know that's their primary responsibility, to consider AA as a whole, not just the area. That's the secondary consideration. It goes on. So there's a lovely argument and confusion ender right there. B, similarly, the trustees, the board members of the General Service Board, operating, of course, within the provision of their own charter and bylaws, it's a longer charter, but still well worth a read in my view, should be able at all times to decide when they will act fully on their own responsibility and when they will ask the conference for its guidance, its approval of a recommendation, or for its actual decision and direction. When I finally read that paragraph, I stopped worrying about whether the board's decision to accept JobKeeper back in 2020, it went away because I realised, my personal viewpoint is irrelevant. What's more relevant than my personal viewpoint, at the very least, is the way AA works. And I'm not even a member of AA service structure if I don't believe the board had the opportunity and responsibility to make that decision. It's up to them when they refer back to the groups or to the delegates. It's not up to us to push them to do what we want. Very interesting. So C, within the scope of their definitely defined or normally implied responsibilities, all headquarters service corporations, committee staffs or executives, in our case 3 General Service Office employees in Sydney, should also be possessed of the right to decide when they will act wholly on their own or when they will refer their problems to the next higher authority. So our decision makers are the decision makers about how and when they make decisions that don't include the rest of AA and when they do. Clear as mud. Let's move on. Let's end with the last 2 paragraphs of this amazing essay. This right of decision should never be made an excuse for failure to render proper reports of all significant actions taken. It ought never be used as a reason for constantly exceeding a clearly defined authority, nor as an excuse for persistently failing to consult those who are entitled to be consulted before an important decision or action is taken. So we have to trust that if it's a complex decision, even if the time frame is short, that involves AA's reputation or AA and how it works, that those trusted servants, board members, delegates, GSRs, DCMs will consult us. Like, this is not permission to do whatever you want. It's quite the opposite. It's a responsibility to constantly think every time there's a decision to make. We don't go back to this is what we normally do. There is no this is what we normally do. Each decision must be made spiritually, case by case, via the group conscience and via the own conscience of those individual delegates. That's the right of decision. Our entire AA program, Bill continues, rests squarely upon the principle of mutual trust, not mutual argument, not mutual weaponizing of traditions, not mutual using the word autonomy to really define willfulness. We have to trust each other. No trust, no point. We trust God. We trust AA, and we trust each other. That involves being let down at times. Part of the responsibility I find of being trustful as an AA member is knowing there will be times where I need to do inventory for a resentment and then call my sponsor. That's just part of it. I will be let down. No one's perfect. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't use trust as my guiding methodology, not just for AA, but in my case for life. Therefore, we cannot do less than trust our leaders in service. If you're a member of a group, it starts with trusting your GSR to go to those assemblies and make a decision, or let them work out when to come back to you. Same with delegates, same with trustees, etc., etc. The right of decision that we offer them is not only the practical means by which they may act and lead effectively, but it is also the symbol of our implicit confidence. I'll end on this. I'm the PI coordinator for my area currently, and every quarter or every half, I should know, it's not in my head right now. I do know, it's just not in my mind right now. I'm allowed to spend $500 of the area's funds at my own discretion. That's an example of being trusted to spend up to a limit. Beyond that limit, I need to talk to the groups about it via our, like emails or assembly votes. Very comfortable with that, by the way. But up to $500, they trust me to spend our resources on carrying the message via public information. It's a really nice example of the checks and balances in play. I trust them with the bigger decisions. I don't trust myself, but they trust me with the smaller decisions around PI. They don't need to get involved. On that note, have a happy sober day. Cheers.